Okay, so we're going to get going. People may wander in, but we're going to start this off. So thank you to all of you who are here, and welcome. I'm going to give a really, really short introduction, and then Borislava and I are both going to do individual presentations, and then we're going to open for some discussion and potential comparison between them. So Borislava and I realized this interesting thing that we're both have been completing research on post-conflict education in former Yugoslavia. And so we came together to do this presentation to explore the concept of post-conflict education in general, and also to offer these two case studies that we've both done. Borislava's working on her PhD, and I've done a case study on Bosnia for my thesis. And so we're going to present them individually, and then we're going to hopefully open for comments and discussion on how these two studies can inform the way we talk about post-conflict education in general, what its place is in post-conflict reform and reconstruction, and then also what comparisons we can find between these two potentially related cases. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you. This is the microphone. Just keep it next to you.
Okay. Okay, so this is actually my research, my doctoral dissertation research that I conducted in Eastern Slavonia, which is the region that I'm coming from. And the title is School Communities, Historical Narratives and Reconciliation in Eastern Slavonia. Okay, so a little bit about the background for the people who don't know where Eastern Slavonia actually is, and the background of the conflict. So, ethnic conflict in Croatia emerged in the wake of Yugoslavia's disintegration in 1991. At this time, it was the end of the Cold War. A big change swept throughout Europe. So, although Yugoslavia was not part of Warsaw Pact, and it was in non-alignment movement, there were still great changes that took place. And the state started collapsing due to the weakness of the state, crisis of the political system, economic crisis. So all of that contributed, and the rise of nationalist leaders. The parties in this conflict, primary parties in the conflict, are Croats, and I will just simplify it. I will just say some basic claims. The conflict is much more complicated. So Croats, they wanted their independent state, while the Serbs wanted to stay in Yugoslavia, and their status was actually dwindled to that of a minority. So this conflict ended in 1995 with Erdut agreement. So it lasted for some time, for 4 years, and there was around 20,000 casualties. So I'll try to speed up through these slides because I want to talk to you about my findings and data analysis more.
Borislava, if I may, the tragedy of Hookah Bar occurred in this region during this time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sometimes called the Hiroshima of Yugoslavia.
Yes, yes. There was a lot of. I mean, that was the greatest battle actually in Croatia, and it ended up with a lot of casualties. Afterwards, there were like 300 people killed. The war prisoners, mass graves, hospital patients. Yeah. So it was one of the greatest tragedies in this war. Okay, so Eastern Slavonia is a geographical region in eastern Croatia. It is situated at the very border with Serbia at the east and Hungary in the north. And as you can see, Croatia is a very small country of 4 million people in the context of Europe. And it borders with Italy, maritime border with Italy, Slovenia, Hungary, Bosnia and Montenegro in the south. So it is positioned in the southeast of Europe. Okay, so what is the research about? I wanted to explore how youths view contentious issues about the recent past, because youths are the future of the country. So I wanted to see what they really think about the recent past, how this translates into their relationships with the other, what is the role of parents and teachers in mediating meanings about past, how we can learn about alternative and locally owned approaches to history education that could lead to reconciliation and sustainable peace. So this is also my research question. So why did I choose this case study? Aside from my personal reasons, protracted social conflict in this area is still ongoing. There is a large Serb minority living in this area, and this area was actually peacefully reintegrated in Croatia after the war. So the Serbs that lived in the other parts of Croatia were actually driven out in one of the biggest ethnic cleansing. There was like 250,000 Serbs who were driven out after the operations Storm and Lightning, and like their return is still ongoing. So in this area, since it was peacefully reintegrated, majority of Serbs stayed. But there are problems. So there is still lack of positive peace because of the stereotyping, because of the absence of cross-group friendships, lack of intergroup interaction, divisions such as segregated schools, and so on. So this is not just my claim, but there are many research and articles written about this region, particular region. Why did I choose historical discourses? Because they're emotionally loaded, they're full of memories and traumas of war, they're usually one-sided, simplified, they exclude perspectives of the other, which actually creates and maintains differentiation along ethnic lines. And education system, why did I choose education system, is that education system can serve as a repository of conflict, where different communities struggle over history and over society's narrative. But I also think that it can serve as an entry point for conflict transformation, for introducing change. Okay. And the other reason is that I think that dealing with the contentious past through education should also be inclusive of the communities at the grassroots. So education and educational policies in post-conflict societies should not only come from the top, curricula should not only come from the government, from the Ministry of Education and political elites, but also it should be inclusive of the grassroots and their views and voices. The second reason is I wanted to explore whether education about history can serve as a tool or a space for conflict resolution. And the third reason is developing practical recommendations for school communities in post-conflict context on how to deal with contentious past. So how? So I decided to use the case study framework. My case study is more exploratory than causal, so I refuse to have a hypothesis because I don't want to have my own assumptions in advance, even though I have, but I wanted to really explore and see what the grassroots communities think about this subject. And also, my goal was to gain deeper understanding of the case study, of the key case. What is interesting about this case study is that there is a spatial variation, that there are both integrated models of schooling and segregated models of schooling. So I went to these different types of schools to conduct my interviews. Okay, theoretical underpinnings, constructivist theory and post-structuralist theory, as well as critical theory. since I'm dealing with discourses, I am coming with this assumption that there are different meanings that people attach to different social phenomena. Sampling. I did purposive sampling of the relevant groups of subjects, which were students. I interviewed 40 students, 8 school teachers, and 12 parents, so altogether 60. 20 in each of the models, and 4 in each of the models, and 6. So I wanted to have the balance in terms of ethnicity and the models. Data collection. Okay, so I analyzed, I took 3 history textbooks, which are my major sources of the official historical discourse. And I also conducted semi-structured interviews. Data analysis that I did was thematic discourse analysis. This was very interesting for me because I could actually analyze explicit language structures and then connect them with some latent structures and wider discourses. I also had some Likert scales data for which analysis I use descriptive statistics. So I will not present on that. I have chosen a snapshot actually of my data analysis because it's quite extensive. Okay, so this is a matrix which represents models and ethnicities. This is how I actually clustered my data. This was initial clustering of data. So first I did comparisons among different ethnicities within the integrated model and then within the segregated model. And then I did cross comparisons between models and ethnicities. Okay, so data analysis. There were 4 relevant sections of interest for all 3 groups of participants. First is relevance of history for present and sources of historical knowledge. Second is mediating historical meanings and the role of parents and teachers. Influence of recent history on the view of the other, and suggestions for the future. So these are the areas that were part of my questionnaire, but they will not be part of the presentation because I wanted to focus on the second section, which is student narratives. Part of the questionnaire was to elicit longer narratives from students in which they would deem which event from recent history is most relevant for them, and in order to see how this connects to the official historical narratives. So this is what this presentation will focus on. Okay, so findings from the history textbooks. History textbooks, the 3 history textbooks that are used in those schools that I went to, actually represent why I picked textbooks, because they represent formal representations of the society's ideology and its ethos. So it is my assumption that they are actually best representative of the official narrative, of the official historical narrative. And the themes that occurred that were most prevalent within the textbooks data were in-group reconciliation, which is reconciliation of all Croats. So there were divisions that date back to the Second World War. There were 2 factions, partisans and Ustašas, communist and fascist factions. So history education and history textbooks played a key role in facilitating this in-group reconciliation. How was it done? Through equalizing what they did, basically, like equalizing some of the atrocities that both of the factions did, and through politics of numbers. The numbers also tended to be equalized in the books. Second theme is sites of memory and nation building. So significant place in the book is given to Vukovar from the recent war, but also Jasenovac and Bleiburg from the Second World War. It is, I mean, it's very important. Jasenovac and Bleiburg, why is it so important? Because for the escalation of the recent war, particularly these sites of memory were used to stir emotions, fear, nationalism. So it is very symbolic, but also mythical. It speaks to the innermost collective beings of these two nations. So it is quite misused, and in the book, again, it plays a role for nation building, for creating these dichotomies between these two nations. The third important theme is victimhood and hegemony, legitimacy and illegitimacy. So this is the narratives are very coherent, very monochromatic, very simplified. There are these dichotomies of victim, victimizer, aggressor, defender, us and them. So this is what is in the history textbooks. And then students' interviews with a particular emphasis on the part of the choice of events from recent history that the students made. So they have chosen Homeland War or Civil War. Homeland War is how the Croats call the war. Civil War is the Serbs' version. Disintegration of Yugoslavia was the second event, and trials in the Hague Tribunal was the third event that they mostly talked about. Major themes that occurred from the data were economic uncertainty that came as a consequence of war, patriotism. The collective patriotism is important for the collective sense of self, freedom, liberation, human rights and justice. This is a very interesting theme because it is not just related to trauma and victimhood, but it's often there is often a dissonance between this theme and the patriotic discourse. Because a very small percentage of students started to question actually the crimes perpetrated by the others, and the inquiry started within this theme, and they were also asking, so what was, not only one side could have done the crimes, so what did our side did, and so the students started really questioning. So this was a kind of a dissent with some students from patriotic discourse. The fourth theme is history as an unfinished process. There is a link between the politics of the day and the recent past, as well as war trials. And war trials that are taking place in The Hague are constant reminder. So this history is really ongoing. It's an ongoing process. And the fifth theme is historical bias. So history is used, most of the students recognize that history is used for political manipulations. They recognize that there are different versions of history and that there is a lack of objectivity. So these are the comparisons overall and between ethnicities and across models. Not go deep in that and go into the findings. So the findings, majority of student participants in both models and of both ethnicities agreed that historical discourses do influence their view of the relevant other. Majority of student participants in integrated model of both ethnicities stated that they wish to associate with or participate in out-of-classroom activities with the members of the other ethnic group, while it was quite the opposite in the segregated model. So this is an interesting finding. Now the theme of economic uncertainty is more prevalent in the narratives of students in integrated model, and it is more prevalent in the narratives of students of Serbian ethnicity, but it is still present also in the narratives of the Croatian students. The theme of patriotism is more prevalent in narratives of Croat students, particularly in the segregated models, which is not a surprise. But patriotic ideals of freedom, belonging to a nation, and the promise of better future for Croat students is often juxtaposed by actual lack of opportunities, unemployment, and social stagnation. So this is where these two discourses of patriotism and economic reality really clash. And the last finding is that human rights and justice theme is more prevalent in the narratives of Serb students, particularly in integrated model. The most prevalent theme overall, and particularly in integrated model of schooling, is historical bias. So a recognition that history is used for political manipulations, that students recognize that it is not objective but depends on the points of view. But this theme is relevant because it opens up a space for complexity, for criticism, for doubt and dissent from the official narrative. Also, the student narratives only partially replicate official narratives. We can see echoes of official discourses, particularly patriotic and human rights and justice discourse, but students are critical of present situation that they see as a consequence of war. Wait, let me notice that. There is more.
Scroll down and see what's.
Okay, so teachers and parents, I didn't go into the comparisons, but I did found some, I read through it and I found some overall themes, especially in terms of recommendations and the role of teachers and parents in mediating historical meanings. So the major themes from the interviews with teachers and parents, and some very interesting suggestions are, for example, regionalization and decentralization of history, so that history should include other actors living in the area and not only the key contenders. So it should not include only Serbs and Croats, but also other people who are other nationalities who are living there, like Germans, Hungarians, Roma, Slovaks. So there is nothing actually in the book about these other minorities that are living in these areas. So this would contribute to the history as a multifaceted, complex, and shared system of knowledge. The second theme is that what the teachers and parents actually proposed is about integrated schools and the importance of language. So there is a sort of a mutilation of language that took place after the war and during the war, which was aimed at formation of particular autonomous identities. While the language is basically very similar and we can understand each other, there are some dialectic differences. But now they're saying, well, we cannot listen the classes in a particular language because they are different. So that's what's going on. So it's used for basically divisions. What the teachers and parents propose is that then we should be able to learn this other language and the other dialects and accept language of the other, and even learn languages of other nationalities that are living in this area. The third theme is shared identity. They propose that maybe some superseding European identity would be good to counteract these nationalist tendencies in the region, which now is a little bit, I don't know if this idea would still stand, but the idea of shared identity would still stand, whatever it may be, whether it's European or some other shared identity. And the fourth theme is that there is a tension between history narrated in school and at home, and therefore there should be more inclusion of the other members of the community, of the grassroots, not just that history education is not only decided from the top, but also have certain voices from the grassroots. Okay. And the conclusions. So history learning, what I'm proposing, what I'm hearing from this data is that history learning should be a communal process. So there should be a joint involvement of all relevant social structures and levels, not just Ministry of Education, but also some local structures, community, NGOs, whoever is working with the youth and whoever is working on this issue should be involved. Moving away from simple, one-sided towards complex narratives to allow multiple perspectives, which is a necessary condition for history education to become more effective in enabling reconciliation and conflict resolution. There should also be a joint exploration of complexity of histories, so value different opinions and recognize suffering of the other. So there should be more dialogue and more conversations among students. If not within school, maybe in some other spaces. People need to own the process, to belong and believe in the possibility of truly integrated communities that will not be imposed from the outside but would emerge from within. So that's it. Any feedback and questions?